Okay, so now we are on to topic 3, which is culture. This first video is going to just really orient you to what culture is and what it is that sociologists study really broadly, and then also specifically in terms of what are the different elements of culture that are a part of a sociological analysis. Now, in terms of the boxes throughout the entire chapter 3 in the online textbook, there really is only one that is required, and it is this one, which is on breaching experiments. So breaching experiments actually is a key concept in your list of key concepts there. So take a look at this discussion here. This box also contains this concept, ethnomethodology, which also I believe is a key concept as well. Okay, so let's define culture. And actually, I'm going to distinguish culture from society. Now, we were introduced to this concept of society in the first chapter in our introduction to sociology, because it is what sociology studies. Society is probably one of the most commonly used words in all of sociology. Despite that, there is no single definition found in all sociology textbooks. They all have just a slightly, different definition of what a society is. Generally, however, sociologists apply the term society to any fairly large group of people who kind of fit four criteria here. So any large group of people who share a common culture, which is good because that's what we're going to be looking at here. But it's also a fairly large group of people who also think of themselves as having inherited a common set of traditions, a group of people who interact with other group members frequently, and who see themselves as being associated with a particular geographical area. So the term sociology in this way can be applied to nations. So we can talk about, countries like Canada, we can talk about Canadian society, and then differentiate that from, say, American society. However, the term society can also be applied to subgroups within a country or a nation. So it is quite common to talk about French Canadian society, which would be people who primarily reside within the province of Quebec, and possibly also New Brunswick has a high population of French Canadians. But it also can be applied to groups that cut across national boundaries. So to talk about North American society and differentiate that from, say, European society, which captures all of kind of the European countries there. So in all of this, a society has this very key element in that it's a group of people who share a common culture. So this is what we're going to explore here: is what is a culture now, and how does that hold together people within a particular space. So definition of culture. Definition of culture here. Culture is really all of the things that you need to know, do, and believe in order to survive within a given society. So, more formally, a culture is the knowledge, language, values, customs, material objects that are passed from person to person, from one generation to another generation, onto within a human group or society. So another way to do this, it's key is this: it's essential to survival, and in meaning being able to live functionally and have your needs met within a particular society in your life there. So a culture in that way can also be defined as, or described as, a design for living within a society, or a toolkit or a toolbox for survival. So survival in terms of living within a particular society or community, and what do you need to survive? You need to know, kind of what are the shared ideas that that community, that society has for, things like, how the world works, what's important, how certain objects get used and what they mean, what human behavior means, and how to communicate with one another, and so on. So this means that the totality of our culture, or a culture, sorry, includes both tangible, physical, or technological aspects of our daily lives. And so for that, we talk about material culture. So these are the objects and things that we have created, and as well. And so that includes things from food. Food is a huge part of culture. So anything that humans have created, so food to art to housing, means of transportation, clothing, tools, all of our electronic devices, that's our material culture, all those objects that we have. But the culture also contains non-material culture and items. So the non-material culture is the intangible world of ideas. So it's the knowledge on how to use those objects, and how to, how to use food and what food is appropriate to eat, how, tools that we create, how to use certain tools and what tools get used when. Um, the intangible world of culture, the non-material culture, also includes things like customs, and rites of passage and beliefs, philosophies. The language of a culture is non-material, is intangible. So our culture is sort of a combination of these two things here. So in the end, culture includes everything that people have, think, and do as members of a society. So I had asked in the introduction, check in Brightspace for this topic here this week. I asked you several questions about, just to consider kind of the clothing that you were wearing on a particular day here. And I'm going to refer back to that a few different points here as we go through our definition of a culture, because clothing is an aspect of material culture, because it's physical things that we have created, humans have created, but also in this example here, there is an element of non-material culture, and that would include, when we're talking about clothing, that would include knowledge about how, on how to wear, items of clothing, when to wear certain things. So based upon the weather or the setting, and knowing that when you go to school, you're maybe wearing something different than if you are going to a play or a formal event, wedding, for example. Um, the clothing, when to wear certain things based upon the activity that you're going to be doing. And given, the non-material aspect when it comes to clothing also includes that, given who might see you wearing, certain clothes, the non-material item there is knowledge about what the meaning of your clothes conveys to others, in terms of the items, the color, the material is going to convey certain things to people who see you wearing those sorts of things. And we're gonna go into some really good examples on that here shortly, but that's, a quick example of both the material elements of our culture and the non-material elements. So let's look at the components of culture. There are four key components to culture. These are things that every cultural toolkit, every cultural toolbox contains. It contains a whole host of symbols, language, and yeah, language, values or beliefs, and norms and sanctions. So I'm going to go through each of these and give you a definition, and we'll look at some particular examples here. So we'll start with symbols. Symbols is it anything that meaningfully represents something else? And so it can be a sound. So when you hear the sound of like a siren or an alarm, you know generally what that means. If it's a siren, you know it's something bad. You know you need to be on the lookout so not to get in the way of the siren or whatever's making the siren. Symbols include gestures that we make. So when you wave your hand back and forth, to someone else, generally that means, hello or goodbye, depending on the context. Language, words is a system of symbols, and we'll look at those separately here in a minute. Colors and objects also are symbols. Let's look at colors here. This is the one we're probably most familiar with. Color is a socially constructed symbol in the sense that as a society, we have certain understanding and meanings that certain colors mean different things. And so, for example, in our Canadian society today, we tend to associate blue with boys and pink with girls. Go to any children's store, baby store, and it's very clearly highly gendered in that way. But actually, where blue is boy, pink is girl, it wasn't really until the 1950s that our current gender color scheme and symbols had become really widely recognized. Before the 1950s, for instance, it actually was kind of the reverse. It was the colors were reversed. What is here on the slide is kind of on the left hand side here is a vintage advice column excerpt from a newspaper, that sort of thing. And from this, we learn that the generally accepted rule is pink for the boy and blue for the girl. And the reason then being that pink was a more decided and strong color previously, which they felt was more suitable for boys, while blue, which is a delicate and dainty color, was prettier for the girl. And you can see here in just a couple of really old, paintings, images there, you can see we're told, by the captions that, the pink, on the little boy and blue on the little girl there. Over time, though, the rules reversed, the meanings of these colors reversed, and today it is generally more accepted that pink is for girls and blue is for boys. So symbols, so very simple sort of, symbol there. So going back to, again, when you've sort of detailed kind of the clothing that you are wearing today, or in this particular point here, think about what would be some of the symbols and the symbolism of of your clothing. And so it could be in terms of the color, for sure. So the color of the different items that you're wearing, are there any sort of symbols? And gender's not the only symbol color, scheme there, but other sort of symbolisms. It's just sort of wider meanings. So the material that is used to make the clothing, we do associate different sort of meanings to different types of material. So looking at, we tend to think that silk and satin materials are more expensive. Therefore, we associate those materials with, more high income, individuals or lifestyle versus, jersey, knit, or cotton, or polyester, that sort of thing. So think about the symbolism of different elements of the clothing that you're wearing, the fashion, the style, that sort of thing also could be symbolic of, different, things in that way. So what sort of messages or information do you think your clothing is implying to others? So language is another component of culture, and language is a set of symbols that expresses ideas and enables people to think and communicate with one another. Language actually can be both verbal and nonverbal. So obviously, talking and words that we speak, but also written language is key there too. And another definition roughly of language is a system of sounds and sometimes figures to which we collectively attach meaning. So let me give you an example of that. And I know we're explaining the obvious here, but this is sort of key to understanding the components of culture. So for example, this is a cat. This is my cat, but this is a cat. And this is, let me just write it out here. And these are the written figures that English language speakers agree stand for cat. Now, the word cat and the actual cat are not the same, clearly, but we all agree that the word cat, or at least these letters all together that way, that stands for a cat. And for that particular object. And when someone makes a sound, when they see the letters CAT together, we all imagine something similar. So that's how language works, and that's how it's socially agreed upon meanings. So when it comes to the example of clothing, this one's a little harder, but you can sort of, use an example of language when it comes to your clothing in terms of any brand names that are on your clothing. I think another way that sort of, just to, sort of illustrate the language component of culture, most clothing have care labels, the tag on them that includes instructions for care and laundering and washing and that sort of thing. And it may be that maybe that language is in English and or in a language that you do or do not understand. You'll also notice there's symbols also, on care labels when it comes to clothing. And, so knowing what, certain symbols like a triangle means, will then determine whether or not you're going to be able to clean your clothing properly. So language and symbols are very similar in that regard. I want to say a couple more things about language here, and these are similar things that the textbook talks about. Language is so important because language helps us to describe our reality. So, for example, I challenge you to try and describe to someone else, what you did yesterday and how you felt about it without using any words. So language is so important, to us on a day-to-day basis and completely. So there is some debate among sociologists, though, about the extent to which language is simply our primary means of communicating with others and the main form of reflecting or describing our realities versus the extent to which our language actually creates our reality. So for those sociologists who believe language creates a reality, they argue that this is because language has its own distinct symbols, which serve as building blocks for reality. Without these building blocks, without these symbols, we would not be able to make sense of our world. In other words, we think primarily in language. Now, I want to introduce you to two anthropologists, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf. They're two anthropologists who specialized in linguistic studies, and they noted that each language has words and expressions with no precise counterparts in other languages. And so they created this hypothesis that states that people perceive the world through the cultural tool of language. Language shapes the view of reality of its speakers. In other words, then two people who might have the same experience, but they have different languages, are going to have different realities because they're going to describe the situation differently. They're going to create different definitions of the situation according to the symbolic interactionists there. So I'll give you an example. Actually, the example, it's a good example that is in your online textbook. Little gives the example of where does it start here? Yes. Starting here, the number 13, and how different societies, so Western society versus Asian societies here, have different sort of meanings associated with different numbers. In Western society, number 13 is we have negative sort of associations and meanings versus in Asian societies, and it creates different realities as a result. Western societies don't have many hotels and buildings, don't have 13th floors, and then so that sort of manifests itself in a very particular way. In Asian societies, it's a different number. Number 4 is likewise considered unlucky, and so very interesting, sort of difference and different sort of realities that come out of different understandings there. Now, following from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the belief that the ability to create and manipulate language. Remember, culture and all its elements are construction and they're not natural or innate. This gives humans then the power to alter how they experience the world. So there are several examples of changing language, particularly in reference to groups of people that help to illustrate this. So I'm going to show sort of the cover of some very old books here, and you'll see that they all include a word that is really inappropriate now. It's really, so much that it's really hard to say, and specifically it's the word retarded. And so you can see here on all of these books, using this language of mentally retarded or the retarded child, it's the language retarded. And so the reason for this, so these are very old books, and this is not appropriate. You would not see a book published today using this particular word in this particular way here. Research shows that language can bias our thoughts to the extent that when we hear certain words, we conjure up images related to those words. Language may not always be the sole determinant of thought, but it certainly provides direction for our perceptions and thus our attention. Language influences our interpretations of social situations and reality. And as a result, we have become more sensitive and more sensitized to the power of words, especially when words are associated with negative labeling, as was the case with the word retarded. We know that language can change our behavior. So, for example, labeling a child as retarded may become a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially when the persons who are labeling a child as retarded, be it their teachers or parents, particularly when it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, when the person's labeling the child as retarded subsequently offer that child less challenging activities, or they pay more attention to their failures than their achievements. A frequent result, we know because of research, was that, children that were referred to and treated as retarded didn't fulfill their full potential. And then and then also potentially also started to see themselves as unintelligent and not as good as other children. So for that reason, derogatory labels like retarded were replaced by neutral or at least less stigmatizing words, and ultimately often of the group's own choosing. In that particular case. And so the main purpose for trying to change the language was to try and change the reality, which then hopefully has given more children who are experiencing developmental delays or mental delays, give them a better chance at a more fulfilling life, and lessen sort of the negative impact that others have on their development in that way. All right, I'm going to actually stop this video and do another video that will look at the other two components of culture on here.